Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tell Me Everything Frog Girl Fridays. I'm your host, Danielle Spinelli, and today I am so excited about this. I have Bryan Nelson, who is an attorney, and he is so smart, smarter than me, and he is talking about basically claims. We got the auto liability stuff. You can go down a whole rabbit hole on that, and it's very interesting. You need to know about those type of things. But there's also the cargo claims and insurance policies that are worded a certain way to make you lose things. When should you push back? When should you realize you failed and you got to pay out a large amount? So, anyways, let's jump in it. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm super excited that you're here. So will you start off, tell a little bit about yourself, how cool you are, and then we can kind of jump into all the talks.
Sure, of course. Now, I will try not to take this from the approach of my 14-year-old daughter who will say, "Dad, you can't say anything that would make you cool." So I will just jump to a brief description of who I am, and we will leave the accolades for other people to decide. Bryan Nelson, I'm a partner here at Taylor Nelson Slattery Bernard. We are a transportation-focused law firm. We only do transportation, and then I guess the ancillary things for our transportation clients, whether that's employment, any type of real estate transactions, and then all your kind of run-of-the-mill transportation things, as well as your more complex and nuanced transportation matters. Anything from, rail to air freight to ocean cargo, international, cross-border stuff to your simple broker-shipper agreements, shipper-carrier, broker-carrier agreements, mergers and acquisitions, all those kind of things, as well as defense litigation and any other type of complex transportation litigations. When you get into those kind of demurrage or detention type arguments with drayage companies, those are the types of things that we do. And then for me, I've been practicing transportation law now for 16 years. 12 years, I was general counsel of a third-party logistics company. We had a subsidiary motor carrier entity and a subsidiary TMS. The TMS is a well-known TMS. We spun those off, and then I stayed with the brokerage because I was like, who's going to pay me the most at this point in my career? So I stayed with the brokerage for a number of more years, had great experience there, and then felt it was time for something new, and then jumped over into private practice and have been here a little over 4 years now.
That's cool. Have you always been interested in the transportation, or what even made you get into this sector? I feel like it's, unless if you, as a attorney, as a lawyer or whatever, it's totally a different avenue than your normal, thing, I guess, that people choose. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so transportation is one of those things. I think University of Denver has a really good transportation law program, as well as I think Michigan State with Matthew Leffler, right, is providing some opportunities to learn about transportation law. But there's really not a focus on this. I actually, when I was about 10 years out of law school, I went back to my law school. I said, hey, I'm interested in teaching a course for transportation. And I drafted a whole syllabus. I really wanted to focus on Carmack and how that applied and cargo claims, which is kind of what we're talking about here with insurance and how insurance applies to different types of claims. And, 30-page syllabus telling all the things that we'll do class by class. Get to the end, they're like, oh, I love this. This is a great idea. I'm going to put it out to a vote to the people, because when you go through law school exams, at the end of the exam, which is super fun, hey, take another test. Are you interested in any of these courses, right? You get like this little pamphlet so they know what kind of courses to offer the next year. I got an email quickly back that says, hey, there's no interest. Nobody cares. So it really isn't this promotional, not even at the undergraduate level. There's not really a promotion of logistics, and it's really frustrating. So for me, I had no experience in logistics, no thought of transportation until freshman year of law, or first year of law school. I tried to get a softball team together with a bunch of other, first year law students, and they are, I don't know how to say this, much better students than I was, because they come to me and they say, hey, I don't think we're going to have time to play softball. I'm like, it's like 2 hours a week, guys. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And so I end up going to the fields. I go to get picked up by a team because I'm like, I'm just going to go. I need something to do. I can't just sit and study all day. So I go to the field. First round of games, nobody needs somebody. The second round of games, some kid comes running up to me. He's like, hey, man, I heard you're looking for a team. I'm like, yeah, I am. He goes, great. One of our guys just got thrown out of the league for throwing a bat at an umpire. Do you want to play with us? I'm like, wow, you sound like the exact type of people I'm used to.
Yeah.
Let's do this. That turned out to be a trucking company, and that was the trucking company that I worked for when I
Interesting.
got out of law school. So I played softball with them all through law school, and then when it was time to graduate and take the bar, when I passed the bar, they said, "Hey, we're looking to grow, and we want to become more professional. Are you interested?" And I was like, absolutely. I was like, what else am I going to do with my student loan debt? So this was
Right?
a great opportunity to kind of jump in. And the industry, the transportation legal industry is so collaborative. I went and joined the TLA right away. And I just asked the president at the time, and I was like, hey, what do I do? And he's just like, read books. Now, granted, I understand I had a target
Yeah.
on my back because I'm a potential client. So he's like, of course, but he didn't have to do all the things that he did. And so I just caught myself up like within like a month, just
Mhm.
reading book after book after book, trying to understand every facet of this industry. And I still have no idea.
I still have no idea either. That's why I started
It's
the
a,
show. There's so much. It's like, how do I learn everything and ask questions and get people to talk to me? So I started a podcast. Here I am.
it's perfect. The beauty about podcasts and the beauty of what you're doing here is that you can go down the rabbit holes. You can go down into the nuances where maybe it's not hitting everybody every time. I think about probably podcast episodes the same way I think about Saturday Night Live skits. Some of them hit and some of them are fantastic, but other
Yeah.
ones I'm like, maybe this is really funny to somebody else because it's not my brand of humor. And it turns out, right? My wife is like, "Oh, this one's so funny." I'm like, "That one was the worst. What are you
Right.
talking about?"
Yeah.
But it made sense. So where one episode is really good for somebody, the next one will be better for somebody else. And so that's what I really love about what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's fun with the frog girl side and then the tell me everything too, because the tell me everything I can really be like, okay, like I went to Manifest this past year and I was like, wow,
Mhm.
I thought I knew logistics. I don't know nothing because I don't know rail. I don't know warehousing. I don't know air. I don't know a bunch of stuff. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, how do I learn those things? So that's kind of how I got into it. So it's cool that you had, people kind of coaching you through like this. There's so many different avenues of logistics, and you've been in like the transportation management, the carrier, the broker, even the TMS side. Like that's the TM area of everything. And with law, there's so many different things with the contracts. I think that kind of get people just find a contract online and post it and use that as their carrier agreement or their broker or their shipper agreement. And I think there's so many different avenues that really people miss out on. And then whenever it comes down to the nitty gritty and you're in a court case, you're like, oh my God, I wish I would have gotten some legal counsel on this. Do you see that really often, especially with your practice now?
So let me take a step back and
Yeah.
say, for everybody out there that's super gung ho about AI and all the things that it can do, I will say that it for me, but like you said, because you people can go out and get contracts online, find samples,
Mhm.
and just use that. I've had clients, "Hey, can you review my contract?" Got it online, and I realized like 4 paragraphs in, it like references a company that they clearly took it from, and I'm like, "Hey, you might wanna update this. How long
Yeah.
have you been using this?" Like, "Oh, like 2 years." I'm like, "Nobody ever said anything?"
Yeah.
But so using AI is a great way to, jump into it, but it's no different whether you use AI or someone finds it online. There's still going to be nuances based on your specific operation, whether you do flatbed, whether you're doing tanker, whether you're doing reefer. And I love there's an online I found this freight guard report where someone says, I know this company's fraudulent because I asked for a flatbed reefer. And it's just phenomenal, right? So those are the types of things. So just making sure that you're paying attention and you don't have a contract for a flatbed reefer.
You're
And
right.
so the part of my business is really understanding what are the things that matter to you. Cause I'll have clients that like, oh yeah, I don't care about that. Or yeah, I care about this. And then I have some clients who have really broad insurance and the insurance is really valuable, but then others are very restrictive. So we have to make the contract more restrictive to align with what their insurance provides, because there's a lot of times, and not just upwards to the customer, but downstroke, if we're talking about brokers, down to what the contract requires of the motor carrier. But for my carrier clients, right, we're constantly fighting, battling brokers, battling shippers, and trying to educate them as to what we can and really can't do, because we do run into those. The broker got this contract, and I'll see the same contract, right? I'll see the same contract across multiple companies, which helps my client save money because, oh, I already reviewed this. I know exactly what to do here.
Yeah.
because there's a lot of actually some insurance agents that say, hey, broker, I know this contract works, and the insurance agents are giving the brokers the contract. And so that contract could work for most things. Same thing with the TIA. Their sample contracts have value to as kind of a starting point and a baseline to make sure you're not missing anything. But then there are very specific items you can get into. Now, I will say I am not a fan of the TIA co-broker agreement. Now, I understand why it was drafted and what it is. It's really even. But in most co-broker situations, you're either broker A or you're broker B, and you
Yeah.
should really modify that contract based on which one you are, because it makes a world of difference, especially with insurance.
Interesting. Which I'm glad you segued into insurance because that's basically what I reached out to you for. Because I'm
Yep.
like, hey, this month we're going over insurance fraud, insurance policies. And I've heard of so many customers that have had like a fraud situation and somebody who's
Mhm.
totally not them. And they're like, oh, well, in our, the insurance company is like, well, because in our policy, fraud is not part of it. And you're like, how can fraud not be part of it? Or like, if our client committed the theft, that's not covered. It's like, what? He's a criminal. There's like so many different things, I guess, that it's is mind blowing to me as like a average person that I'm like, how can you not cover this? Or then I know some people have actually taken it to court and then they won, or at least they got a payout, that type of thing. So I think there's great segue, I guess, with what you just said on how what type of cases, I guess, have you been seeing as far as, let's say, like a claim that gets escalated to like a court situation, or especially when it comes to fraud? Have you seen those type of court cases quite a bit? And what are some things, I guess, that people can do to help mitigate that risk or win cases?
So we are, to take a game show analogy, there are so many doors to choose from. Or I guess if we want to use, let's make a deal. Is it let's make a deal? The one with all the
Cases?
briefcases. Yeah, we're essentially, we have to open all the briefcases to find out, are we opening $1 million or are we opening, a penny? So taking a step back in terms of what we can do or what the risks are when we're setting up our operations, start with reading your policy. Just read your policy. And for anyone that does carrier verification, carrier setup, anyone in your carrier management department, if you're a broker, they should know your policies. Whenever I talk to my clients, I'm like, one, have you read your policy? And two, the people that are enforcing, hey, whether yes or no to certain carriers, do they understand the risks under our insurance? Because yeah, they understand the general risk. Hey, if something happens here, we could be potentially liable. But then you have that extra step of insurance to say, well, not only is it a risk, but if you think, oh, my insurance is going to cover it, like you said, they find insurance is not in the business of covering claims. They're in
Right.
the business of making money. And as someone who lives in a hurricane prone area, insurance generally does not like to pay out claims, and it's very difficult and it's very time consuming. And I will tell you that your opportunities to be successful with a transportation attorney greatly increase your odds of recovery from insurance companies. And insurance companies are not your friends. Now, our firm does represent a few insurance company clients, and I can tell you some of the smaller, more nuanced, more targeted insurance companies, they do really care and want to benefit the industry. But then you have these large companies that are just, listen, you're just a number to them.
Right.
So there really are good people in the insurance industry that see a problem and want to provide coverage for it, because they recognize some of these run-of-the-mill kind of insurance policies. There are so many gaps in exclusions in coverage that it doesn't make you go in thinking, oh, I'm going to be covered. I'll take this risk with this carrier. I'll take this risk with this load because I have insurance. Then your insurance comes, hey, you don't have it. And
Yeah.
I think there's a couple things to talk about, especially with fraud. So getting back to your fraud point, is if you are a carrier and you deliver to the wrong place, you'll say, oh, well, I did what the broker told me to because it was a blind shipment. And for
Yeah.
those of you that don't know what a blind shipment is, a blind shipment, and I'll give an example here. Let's say I am a large food store. My wife makes fun of me because I call it a food store, not a grocery store, but a large food store. And you have a produce or a distributor that sells you, or let's say a bottling company that sells you goods over and over. And then you have a contract with someone else to buy those essentially in bulk. And so rather than paying the transportation costs from that producer to your warehouse and then sorting, organizing, and then sending it back out and incurring both those transportation costs, right? The shortest distance between 2 points, straight line. You just have it go from that producer to the other party, but you don't want to tell the producer, I'm actually just bringing it straight to my customer, because then they'll just want to solicit your customer and say, just buy from us directly. We'll match or beat your price, right? So it's a
Right.
way to avoid that kind of back solicitation from a customer to customer standpoint. However, because blind shipments exist, carriers come into this and go, I'm now all of a sudden, I can do this and I don't need to listen to the bill of lading. But then when they find out that that broker that hired them wasn't legit, they're now left with, hey, I have liability because the bill of lading governs. And they say, well, I'm not liable. Well, under Carmack, you have to prove you're free from negligence. And then you have to prove one of the 5 exceptions. Well, getting scammed by a broker is not one of the 5 exceptions to Carmack liability. So you as a carrier have potential liability, and your insurance company is going to say, well, most insurance companies will come out and say, hey, you voluntarily parted with these goods. And voluntarily parting with goods is not covered. And or, hey, as your point, if it's part of a fraud scheme or a criminal action, we're not going to provide coverage there either. So what I would say to motor carriers to help protect you from, not only liability, but also from uncovered or uninsured liability, read the bill of lading. And if you see a bill of lading that has a company on it listed as the carrier, now we all know that bills of lading are auto-generated, and whether you're a broker or carrier, you usually get listed as a carrier on the bill of lading. If you get a shipment from a broker and that broker's name is not listed on the bill of lading as, the carrier, and you don't recognize them, call that company and say, hey, listen, just to confirm, I have a blind shipment. I got the shipment from so-and-so. Chances are you will probably have protected yourself and picked up a new client with this broker. Say, oh man, you guys did awesome. Thank you. You're going to save such a headache. And what that does is, and I will say it this way, most contracts have a no back solicitation provision. Calling to verify if the load is legitimate or not is not a back solicitation.
Nowadays.
No. So you would be doing a favor not only to yourself, but to the actual broker that arranged it initially. So yeah, the fraud is a huge issue. Now on the broker side for insurance, you usually don't have coverage unless you contracted directly with the motor carrier that physically transported the goods. And this is where I will do my angry, vitriol spewed tirade at shippers. Shippers don't do enough in this industry, and it drives me nuts. They just sit here and go, oh, fraud's a transportation problem. We're not going to do anything about it. I've given this anecdote a couple times, and I think you might have been there one time when I said this. I had a shipper who said we were going back and forth on language inside of a contract, and they said, well, we don't need this language, which will help protect my client, the broker, because we give you guys a secret code. And that's how we know who's showing up is actually the right party to come pick up the load. And I say, okay, but you give that secret code to us, the broker, right? And yes, absolutely. And I have to give that secret code to the carrier, right? Like I have to tell them that code. Oh yeah, we get that. Yeah. Then that's how we know it's correct. And I'm like, what's keeping that carrier, if they're a fraudulent party, from giving that code to the next person?
Right.
And her head exploded. And it was like, you've seen the movie Something About Mary? When they're in the car with the guy from Half Baked, and he's got the body. He picked up the hitchhiker. He's got the body. He's like, I got, there's 8-minute abs. I got 7-minute abs. And Ben Stiller goes, well, what about 6-minute abs? What if someone comes out with 6 minutes? And he's like, no, you can't even get your heart rate up with that. She was like, absolutely not. Nobody would do that. And I'm like, oh my God, are you not paying attention to what's happening in transportation?
Yeah.
That is the easiest thing to do. And so for me, why can't you walk the 53 feet from your dock to the front of the trailer and say, is this the same company that the broker hired? Now, granted, obviously, if someone is messing with placards and putting things on, we can't guarantee that somebody just one day decides, I'm just going to go crazy and start stealing shipments. I always told my wife that if I ever decide to go postal and really freak out, I said, I'm just going to go to, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not going to hurt anybody, but I'll go to a truck stop and just start cutting trailer seals and just be like, well, this is my goodbye. Let's see what happens to the world. Right? And just mess everybody's day up. But no, I don't understand why shippers aren't doing more. And then when there's a loss, they sit there with their hand out. And so you have to be free from negligence in order to be, to protect yourself from cargo liability. So if you hired somebody that was a fraudulent carrier, and a lot of times, depending on how your contract's drafted, if you're only liable for your own actions, there's possibility that you can say, well, I was free from negligence. And if I told the shipper who was coming and they loaded somebody else, then I have an argument to say, well, it's fault of the shipper. So I'm free from negligence and it was your fault. However, if I have to also be liable for the actions of the motor carrier, and so this is very contract specific, that I can't go and look at the carrier and say, well, I was free from negligence. Yeah, but the carrier you hired wasn't free from negligence. They were the fault. They were the defrauding party. And so it really matters how your contracts are drafted, how you're going through this. Because when you go to insurance is going to ask for you. The first thing they ask for, show me the contract. And that's how you'll start off.
Well, I think, like you said, the doing your due diligence part, like there's only so much you can do. And one of the things that like I push and like not to plug my company, but my company has is like a VIN verification. And it texts to a driver, they take a picture of their truck, show their VIN number. It shows it has to be a live photo, like it shows it's them, they're standing with the truck. This belongs to this company or this belongs to somebody else. Where are they really? Kind of like all those little ties on top of your actual vetting. So, and other than the shipper walking out and doing those things, like how else as a broker would you know? So to me, that is, hey, other than me sitting in the truck with the guy, I don't know how else I would have been able to do more due diligence. Is something like that considered to be like a due diligent thing, or is it where it needs to be a little bit step further with having shipper compliance? Or does it all simply depend on your contract?
Depends on your contract. And I'll say this because you brought up a great point. Brokers are spending, most of my clients spend tens of thousands of dollars a month in carrier verification, carrier setup, programs, software, technology. And again, the shipper can't walk 53 feet. Like
Right.
it's just, you guys are so negligent, right? Your collection companies. Well, you are super negligent. It's like, yo, what did your carrier do? What kind of software did the carrier have? They saw the bill of lading listed somebody else, and they're just like, yeah, well, cool. This makes sense to me. And
Right.
so the brokers are really having such a bad rap because nobody on either side wants to do the work, and so brokers are just left because they're like, oh well, they have the money and they have the funds and they have the insurance. Let's go ahead and get them. But vetting and verification, I think, when we're talking about cargo claims versus auto liability, are two different things, right? So when you have a cargo claim situation, usually vetting is not necessarily your negligent hiring, negligent selection doesn't really come into play because Carmack has some sort of, strict liability regime. And if you don't, as a broker, contractually agree to cargo liability, or you don't hold yourself out to the public, or on this specific shipment, you don't hold yourself out as a motor carrier, then you don't have liability for
Mhm.
cargo loss or damage. So you have to contractually agree to it, or you're just telling everyone, hey, listen, I'm really a carrier, and you're signing carrier agreements, and you're going to have an issue, to
Yeah.
which your insurance company may or may not provide coverage there anyways, because your contract said you were a carrier. And so when you have the carrier versus broker distinction, you need to make certain, hey, listen, I am hiring this carrier, and I checked their insurance. I did, the verification parts necessary, but contractually, I want to make sure that I'm not liable for more than I would need to be. On the auto liability, because we're dealing with third parties that are injured, whether it's their personal property or their persons themselves, if they're injured, we can't limit or, keep our liability down for them. What's owed to them will be owed to them. And that's where you need to get a transportation firm and work with your insurance for, your auto liability and contingent auto liability protections. That's where your carrier selection will really come into play. And they will scrutinize. They'll say, hey, have you ever made exceptions? Did you make exceptions on this time? Who made the exceptions? What qualifications do they have? Right? Because what's going to happen is whoever gets to make that determination, that's the person that's going to be on the stand. So if you have somebody in your company as a broker that is deciding yay or nay to somebody, then you need to make certain that that person is someone that makes sense to be on the stand for, or even on a deposition, because that's who they're going to call. Who's responsible for these records? And what training do you have? And I would guarantee that most brokers don't have somebody that used to be a safety manager at a motor carrier that's doing the carrier verification process.
Right.
That's a very slippery slope. But if you have a policy, which I recommend every broker has a policy, stick to the policy.
Interesting. So I think you bring up a good point as far as having a process in place. And when you do deviate from that process, I think you always need to have documentation. Like if you are going to
Yes.
make an exception, you need to write in some sort of manner, hey, this carrier had ABC wrong with them. We made an exception because we did our due diligence with X, Y, and Z, and this is how we determined that these are actually okay to use. Because there is so much gray area in logistics. It's not black and white at all. And is that something I guess that you recommend on that point where you would document, and or do you feel like that's just more of a liability?
Well, so I think it's a liability because especially if there's an
Mhm.
exception and that's the one that caused it. Now, when you look at a lot of the cases out there, the courts, when they really dive into the negligent selection in the jurisdictions where negligent selection, negligent hiring, are opportunities to recover against brokers. Now, our our firm's case that we handled here in the 11th Circuit has F4A, the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act, preempt any type of state law causes of action, your breaches of contract, your negligent hiring, negligent selection claims against brokers preempted. So you can't hold a broker liable for third-party injuries here in the 11th Circuit. There's other circuits that have, taken that up, and there's currently a 2-2 split as to whether, hey, yeah, you can hold a broker liable or yes, or no, you can't under the 4A, and whether the safety exception kind of turns that. That's kind of a little bit beyond what we're talking about here. But when we're discussing liability and coming into play and coming into determinations under your carrier selection policy, if your carrier selection policy, you start making exceptions here and there, then they're going to look at it and go, you really don't have a policy.
Yeah.
And so if there's something that you would make exceptions for, build that into the policy itself. And now it's not an exception, it's part of the policy, right? So if there's something where you're constantly making modifications to, then update the policy. And the policy at the time that the incident occurred, or we qualified some carrier to come and do the work or verified them to be eligible under our policy. I have concerns about waivers. Now, I understand that they happen. Maybe you do it on a per shipment basis and you understand the risks of what happens if you waive this and that person gets in an accident. You have to know that what they're going to come back and say, had you followed your own policy, so-and-so would still be alive. So-and-so would not be injured. So it's a horrible look. Not saying it's impossible to overcome, but it is a horrible look and something that will be used against you. And so trying to mitigate those instances is extremely important. So if you do deviate something let's say is, hey, depending on the situation, we will accept this, build that into your policy and have an explanation right there. So you say, hey, it's not a deviation. We didn't make an exception. We followed our policy. This is what we agreed to as a policy. Because no matter what, there are two things that brokers cannot control when it comes to auto accidents. And same thing with carriers, you really can't control, is you can't control generally the jurisdiction where it occurs, right? You have shipments all over the place. There's going to be accidents somewhere. And you also can't control who the plaintiff is, right? So you look at Walmart a number of years ago, right, with the accident with Tracy Morgan. And I can only imagine that settlement was extremely generous for Tracy Morgan to come out and thank Walmart, right? His best friend just passed in this accident, and he's coming out and thanking Walmart for how they handled this. I mean, that's nuts. If my best friend got killed in a car accident, I don't know what type of, and I was there to witness it, and I was severely injured as well. I don't know that I would come out and say, thank you for how you handled this. I mean,
And
that's just amazing.
I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of an amazing thought to think about. And when you have these policies, if you deviated from the policies, that number probably only gets bigger. And so if you can't control where you are, unless you only take shipments in certain jurisdictions, but you can't control who the plaintiff is because you have no idea what the plaintiff's situation is, whether it's somebody with a family of 10 or it's, an elderly person who had stage 6 cancer and was going to pass tomorrow anyways. Right. And so you have all these scenarios that you can't control. But what you can control is the frequency at which you take a risk. Right. So you can't control severity, but you can control frequency. And so how frequently are you willing to make an exception or to, loosen your policies to open the door for potential issues?
So let's just talk about cargo claims. Like, let's just.
Okay.
I think the auto stuff will be like, we can go down rabbit holes upon rabbit holes.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like there's so much, and I think until we get it goes all the way up, I think we're always going to be in this little debacle. But I think cargo claims, I guess what was frustrating for me as like a broker was whenever I know I hired this, and like we already talked about, I hired this, so and so already showed up, this happened, or like let's say, okay, for instance, I did copper for a long time, and I had it where somebody was getting tailed, they stopped, they didn't even leave their truck, they slept in their truck, but their trailer got raided while they were sleeping and whatever. So then the insurance company was saying we were whatever, like they were saying like they weren't standing there on guard and all this craziness. And you're like, he was in the truck, like he didn't even leave. Or so he says, like, I'm sure he did leave, but that's neither here or there. But that's what he says. And so we took it to court and then we ended up winning, or they actually settled. But I think like instances like that, I think a lot of brokers will kind of shut down and be like, okay, well, they said no, let me just fork out some money and do this. It's not
Oh,
worth
hell no. Yeah. Never do that. No.
Yeah. So that's where I guess I would love to hear your advice on when is it where you should keep pressing and when is it that you're like, okay, I lost on this when I messed up. Or is it, I mean, I know it's a very broad question.
Oh, no,
Um,
it's a great question because I think it goes to the fact that in your business as a broker or as a carrier, what are you doing every day? You are negotiating rates every single day. Someone offers you a rate. When was the last time that a broker took a rate and was like, yeah, that's good?
right,
Or a carrier's like, yeah, no, cool. What you're offering, fantastic. It's
right.
exactly what I wanted. No, you ask for more. So I don't understand when your insurance company comes and talks to you. They're like, no, we're not gonna pay you this. You're like, oh, cool, thank you.
Yeah,
Goodbye. I'll figure it out. Why are you not negotiating? Why are you not pressing this? Every single claim that gets denied, send it to somebody to review. If
right.
you don't have an internal claims person, and I will say this, when I was in house and I would send a letter to a third party, so outside of insurance, I would send a letter to somebody, and I was like, man, like the Christmas story. I make this reference often. I'm like, this is going to be an plus 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 demand letter. Everyone's going to love it. I'm going to be celebrated. I get no response from it. But I give it to my friend in a law firm just down the road. Hey, buddy, can you just put this on your letterhead? I already did all the work. I just need you to send it out. He will
Yeah,
get a call the next day. The next day he'll get in there, hey, we're ready to talk. Because they view it as once you give it to a third party, they view you as more serious. They
yeah,
view you as, oh, this is clearly something you're willing to invest money in. And so now all of a sudden it's here. It's with a law firm. And so the same thing happens with your insurance. The adjuster is going to say, I don't know, I don't think so. And then you have an attorney look at it and they draft a letter and say, hey, listen, this is what happened. So when an attorney gets involved, now all of a sudden they take it a little more seriously. Maybe it goes up the chain a little bit, but also it goes to coverage counsel. And when
mm,
you get to coverage counsel is putting a percentage on your claim. How likely do they believe they'll be successful in this litigation? So let's
yeah,
assume they think, hey, we're going to be 50% successful. We'll offer the other party 50%. Or, hey, we as an insurance company, I think we're going to be, 7 out of 10 times we're going to be successful. Offer to settle this for 30%. And that's what they do. They look at it from a, hey, how successful are we going to be in this claim? Now, sometimes they're just going to say, hey, you have nothing here and you're wrong, right? Because you have those clear cut exclusions. But I have seen exclusions. What was it? Oh my God. There was something that they had. Oh, they had cheese. They had an exclusion for cheese.
random.
No coverage for cheese. And the cargo was queso. Now, I understand queso is literally the word for cheese in Spanish. But when you think about queso, there's a whole bunch of other ingredients. You don't pick up like Tostitos queso and go, oh yeah, it just says cheese in here. No, there's a whole bunch of other products, byproducts, other things that are built into that make it different than cheese.
Yeah,
Right? And they denied the claim and they're like, oh, okay, cool. And we're like, what are you doing? No. And then so we argue it. And even before you get to litigation, a few
yeah,
demand letters, a conversation with coverage counsel, a conversation again, few down the road. And in a couple months, you've got 70%, 60%, 40% of the claim covered, plus the amount if you're a broker that you potentially withheld. If you have that ability in your contract, which you should, and obviously if you're a carrier, you're going to fight against having any offsets or deductions in your contract.
mm-hmm.
That ability, just getting that money when you spend, a couple grand on a um on a attorney versus the 40, 50, 60 grand that you just got from insurance, it makes sense to do
There
it. It's
are
why you
like,
have insurance. Yeah. And so having that ability to turn to an insurance company and say, you're wrong here. Here's why you're wrong. It's good to have someone to articulate that. And especially when it comes from out of your office, the insurance company's like, oh, well, now we need to handle this. Now we have a cargo claims department, one of our associates, Lauren, she actually worked with me when I was in house. She was my law clerk. When I was in house, she went off and did her own thing afterwards. And when I came to private practice, I was like, hey, do you want to come do come do transportation again? She's like, absolutely, let's do it. And
yeah,
so she gets fantastic results. And I would say that, you know, if you have somebody, if you in a firm that can do that and knows all the adjusters, right, knows the things that really stand out to them. These are the facts that really can push us forward. It's very, very helpful. Even if you spend $2,500 and 3,000, maybe you have to go further. And hey, we have to draft a sample demand letter or a complaint and get ready to file it. And we're going to file a complaint. But even if we get to that, we're going to tell you all. And any attorney, any transportation attorney will tell you, hey, this is what I think it's going to cost you, whether you'll be successful. We're doing the same thing on our end. Hey, it doesn't make sense to take this further. Let's kick the tires and see what happens.
right. Well, I think that's
And
very interesting. And like you said, like the on the cargo piece, okay, like the exclusion section that like for cheese, like that's one I've never even heard of. And I think as a broker, getting an exclusion list from an insurance company is honestly the biggest pain in the world. They can change it at any moment. They don't have to notify you. So like now that I work on like the tech side, they don't have to notify you on any changes. So like now that I know these things, whenever I was a broker, I had copper, and whenever they would have an exclusion that you could purchase additional insurance so that you're covered for this load or whatever. Well, they could mid transit cancel it, and then I'm screwed. And the insurance company didn't even have to notify me technically. I mean, most people did the right thing, but they don't
Yep.
technically have to. And so I think, and you can't really have somebody reading these exclusions day in day out. There's just literally no way. Is there, with that all being said, and how that process works? Do you feel like that's also kind of another case that you can push as far as on a litigation section, like, hey, this is a weird exclusion that's usually not on there, or is it simply based on that policy coverage, and then they can kind of, does that make sense what I'm asking?
Totally. So it's really policy specific. So if your policy excludes something, it's going to be excluded. Now, if they try to, shoehorn, like I said, cheese into queso, well, it only makes up, X% of what the queso is. And not to mention the rest of there's salsa on the rest of the load. They try to disclaim the whole load. The exclusion part of this is if it's cut and dry, it's cut and dry. Like you had the unattended vehicle. Well, how do you prove there was, if it's unattended, it needs to be in a secured lot. Was it in a secured lot? No, it was just at a truck stop. Unsecured truck stop. He went, took a shower, went to the restaurant, whatever. It was gone. Even if he was in the trailer, which I think you said you guys were successful, that's why, hey, it wasn't an unattended vehicle. He was
Right.
there. It was attended. And so when you have the exclusions are going to apply unless it's not really lining up. And so we had, and just to be clear, there's a difference between seafood and shellfish in most cargo policies. So if you're doing shrimp and lobster and you say, oh, well, I need to find out if they have exclusion for seafood, just know that seafood may not be the same as shellfish under their policy.
Mm.
And so when you're dealing with, like my company, we did a lot of seafood, a lot of
Yeah.
shellfish. And so with those shipments, we always called and verified. And it's amazing because the insurance agents that write these policies, they're like, oh, they're like, I don't know what their exclusions are. I'm like, you have read the policy.
Right. Or
Like,
I gotta get
just
what's
read
happening.
it. Is it an exclusion or not? Just
Right.
send us the exclusions list. We'll look at it. And we have a load picking up in 4 hours. I
Right.
need this. Tell me. And then they don't know.
Right.
And then it does such a disservice to the carrier because the carrier is sitting here going, I know I have this coverage. Just tell them, show them. I'm on the road. I shouldn't have to do this. You're my insurance agent. Do this for me.
Right.
And so to your point, getting exclusions, if you have a specific commodity that you're doing and your commonly excluded commodities, right, are your precious metals, you have your seafood, shellfish, you have cigarettes, you have your alcohol, you have works of art. Those are pretty much your standard ones. But then you get into really weird nuances based on how much money the carrier is willing to spend, right? Sometimes they say, listen, I only haul X. And they say, I only want coverage for X. But then what happens? They start carrying Y and they never let their insurance company know. And the insurance company's like, well, they only told me they were doing this. So we're going to cancel the policy and say this was a fraudulent, they fraudulently applied for insurance. They didn't answer the insurance questionnaire correctly. And now we're voiding coverage. Not only
Yeah.
that you're not covered, we're saying we're voiding coverage. And then they walk back and they have to pay back all the policy premiums for that year to the carrier. So that's a pretty extreme example. But if there's a bad enough claim where they think, oh, the carrier said they were only hauling teddy bears. Well, now they're not hauling teddy bears. They're hauling this. And so it can get pretty aggressive. And so the
Interesting.
language of the policy will dictate whether something is covered or not. And I will say it this way, if it's not excluded, it's included. So there has to be a specific exclusion. Otherwise, it is included.
Yeah.
But
Because I
then you
know
also have your flatbed people with, the mold, moisture, and those types of
that's right.
damages.
I forgot about that part too. That's such a pain. Yeah, for copper, it can't say precious metals. It had to specifically say copper. That was the only way that we could specifically be denied. Interesting. Well, I learned a lot
Yeah,
today. Thanks for jumping on.
of course, of course.
Awesome. Well, how can everybody reach you? Talk about your firm, how awesome you guys are. I keep saying how
Sure.
awesome.
Sure. Again, not from the eyes of a 14-year-old. I can be reached. My email is bnelson@taylor, Taylor, pl.com. So that's bnelson at taylorlawpl.com. My phone number here is 813-212-1005. And then you can check out our website, which is taylorlawpl.com. Again, anything transportation, carrier, broker, freight forwarder, warehouseman, drayage, home delivery, technology, anything from there, from corporate startups to, established companies, contract reviews, complex litigation, and anything in between.
That's awesome. Love it. Well, thanks for doing all your work. Thanks for hopping on here and explaining all the things
Oh.
because little dumb old me doesn't know all the things. So I appreciate that.
Well, you're playing. I know you're playing it that way. I know you know everything I said. You're like, yeah, I knew
No, I didn't. I actually did. I learned
that.
today. That's not true. No, but I'm gonna have to buzz you again and get you on at a later date too, because there's so many
Okay.
different things like law wise that unless if you're an attorney, you would have no idea. So I appreciate your time.
Let me know. Happy. Thank you so much for having me.